Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. I've never been one to believe in things I can't see, things that don't make sense. But now, when I step outside, I can feel it. Something's not right. The city is alive, as it always is. Cars honking, people laughing, the occasional distant siren wailing. But I feel like I'm invisible. Like the world is moving without me, and I'm just stuck. A ghost in my own life. The noise fades, the colors blur, and all I can think about is the thing I can't escape. The faceless man. It started small, just glimpses out of the corner of my eye. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it, my mind playing tricks on me. But it doesn't stop, it never stops. Today, as I stepped out into the evening air, the city seemed almost normal. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting everything in that warm, golden light, like the calm before a storm. But something was off. That coldness crept up on me, like a shadow sinking under my skin, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. The city sounds faded. I was alone in the crowd, my feet moving, but I wasn't sure where I was going anymore. And that's when I felt it. He's here. I glanced to my left, the alley. I didn't want to look, I knew what I'd see, but my body moved on its own. And there he was, just standing there like he was waiting for me. I don't know how I could see him without looking directly at him, but I knew. I felt him. The outline of his figure, tall and broad, standing in the shadows of that alley. His shape was vague, as though the darkness itself had taken form. But there was something else, something wrong about him. He didn't belong in the world. I should have turned away, I should have kept walking. But I couldn't stop looking, not directly, but enough to know. The darkness was alive in him, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. I forced my legs to move, my pace quickening, like I could outrun the feeling that was tightening around my chest. Every step felt heavier. I tried not to look back. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, but I could feel him. He was still there, just on the edge of my sight. Keep moving, Emily, just keep moving. But it didn't help. The air felt thicker. The cold crept in deeper. I was being watched. And no matter how fast I walked, no matter how far I pushed myself, I could never escape the sense that something was always right behind me. I rounded a corner, trying to get away. He's not real, I thought again. I had to believe that, or I'd lose my mind. But there was no way to escape him. He was always there, always lurking in the edges of my vision, waiting, watching. And then, there it was again, the sensation, the heavy, suffocating presence standing just across the street. I didn't want to look, but I did anyway. The faceless man. I could feel him. I couldn't see him clearly, but I knew. I felt his form, tall and looming, like a shadow waiting to swallow me whole. And even though he stood at the far end of the street, it was as if the space between us had already disappeared. He was closer than ever, even though he hadn't moved an inch. I blinked, once, twice, trying to convince myself that I was losing my mind. But when I opened my eyes again, he was still there. His figure was more defined now, like a darkness that seeped into the fabric of the world, erasing all the light around him. I tried to take a step back, but my body felt frozen, like my feet were cemented to the ground. My heart was pounding, my breath was too shallow. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. The world seemed to tilt around me, the noise of the city fading into a muffled hum, like I was underwater. and all I could focus on was him, standing in the shadows, waiting. I snapped my head away. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't let him see me. But when I turned the corner, I heard it, just behind me. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, following me. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't imagining him. I wanted to run. My legs screamed to move, but my body was frozen in place. Every inch of me was screaming to get away, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't move. I turned around again, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing there. The street was empty. No faceless man, no shadow. Just the dim glow of the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. But he was still there. I could feel him. I could feel the cold creeping in. And I knew, deep down, that no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, he would follow. I wasn't just seeing him. I wasn't imagining him. He was real. And the worst part, I didn't know how to stop him. So I kept walking. My pace quickened again. The city felt too large, too full. And yet I felt more alone than ever. My mind raced, searching for an explanation, but nothing made sense. Nothing could explain the suffocating weight of his presence. He was with me. Always, just behind me, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to remember what I had tried so hard to forget. The room felt suffocating the moment I stepped inside. Dr. Lucas's office is usually a place of calm, warm tones, soft lighting, the faint scent of lavender that's meant to put you at ease. But today, it felt different. I felt different. My heart was pounding in my chest, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I sat down in the familiar leather chair, forcing myself to keep my hands still, though they were trembling slightly. The room was too quiet. Even the clock on the wall ticked with an unnatural rhythm, each second dragging on, stretching the air between us. Dr. Lucas sat across from me. That ever-patient look on his face, pen in hand, his eyes never leaving mine. He was waiting. He always did, his calm demeanor making it feel like I could talk about anything. But today, there was something in his gaze, something more intense, more searching. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but direct. "You've been doing better. But there's something we need to address. You keep mentioning the faceless man. I think it's time we talked about him." My stomach dropped. The faceless man. He had to be talking about the thing that haunted me, the thing that I could never escape. It was hard to breathe when I thought about him, when I felt his presence lurking just outside the corner of my vision. "I don't want to talk about him," I muttered, my voice barely audible. My throat felt tight, and I swallowed hard, trying to hold back the panic creeping up my chest. I knew he wouldn't let it go. He never did. But I didn't want to face it. I couldn't. "Emily," Dr. Lucas said again, his tone still calm, but with a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place. "You're avoiding something. This man, he's not just a figure. He's tied to something deeper, something in your past, something you've been running from." I recoiled inwardly, though I tried to hide it. The words hit me harder than I expected. He was right, I suppose. The faceless man wasn't just a shadow in the corner of my mind. He was something more, something darker, something I couldn't run away from anymore. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice thin and desperate, hoping that if I just denied it long enough it would go away. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. "I'm just stressed. Overwhelmed, work, life, everything." But I could feel Doctor Lucas's gaze on me, steady and unyielding. He wasn't buying it. I wasn't fooling anyone, not him, not myself. He saw through me and I couldn't hide anymore. "Emily," he pressed, his voice softer now but with a weight that pulled at me. "You've been carrying something for a long time, something you've buried deep, this faceless man. He's not just a figure in your mind, he's a symbol. He's the guilt you haven't faced, the pain you've kept hidden." His words were like a cold blade, cutting through the thin veil of control I had left. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The walls of the office, the soft rug beneath my feet, the faint ticking of the clock, it all blurred together as I fought to hold myself together. "I don't want to deal with it," I whispered more to myself than to him. The words tasted like poison in my mouth, but they were the truth. I couldn't face what had happened, what I had done. Dr. Lucas leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. "I know it's hard, but Emily, you can't keep avoiding it. The more you bury this, the more it will consume you. The faceless man isn't just a hallucination. He's real, in a way. He's a part of you, a part of your past that's been festering in the shadows." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I could see it all, the guilt, the grief, the pain I'd tried to bury for so long. It was too much, too heavy. I wasn't ready to confront it. "I don't know how to do this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Lucas didn't say anything right away. He just sat there, watching me. His silence felt like a weight on my chest, but it was a weight I couldn't shake. "You don't have to do it all at once," he finally said, his voice softer now. "But you have to start somewhere. You've been running from it for too long." I looked up at him, tears threatening to spill from my eyes. I was so tired of running, so tired of pretending I could outrun the past. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't strong enough. "I can't, not today," I said, standing up abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor, loud and jarring. I had to get out of here. The walls were closing in, the air too thick, the weight of everything I'd been hiding pressing down on me. Dr. Lucas didn't stop me. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. "When you're ready, Emily." "I'll be here." I didn't answer him. I couldn't. I just turned and walked out, the door clicking softly behind me. The hallway outside felt cold, almost unnatural, as if I were stepping into a different world. A world where the faceless man wasn't just a shadow in my mind. A world where he was real, and where I couldn't escape him. I felt him before I saw him. The cold, suffocating presence. The feeling of being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I walked down the corridor, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel him, always lurking, always waiting. And no matter how fast I walked, no matter how far I ran, I knew one thing for sure. He would always be there, watching, waiting, following. Because the faceless man wasn't a stranger, he was me. I didn't want to go. I knew, deep down, that I shouldn't have agreed to step outside, shouldn't have let Lily drag me into the world I was trying so hard to avoid. But I did it anyway, because Lily, she didn't understand. She didn't see the things I saw, the shadows that followed me. And how could I explain to her that everything I thought was normal, was now twisted into something darker, something suffocating? The phone call came just as I was trying to shut out the noise in my head. Lily. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen as it lit up, her name flashing back at me. A part of me wanted to ignore it. I wasn't ready. I never felt ready. But Lily was persistent. She never gave up. She couldn't know. I answered the call, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. "Hey." "Em, you're ignoring your texts," Lily's voice sang through the phone, bright and carefree, as if nothing had changed, as if nothing had happened. "I'm outside. Come on, let's take a walk. We used to do that all the time." A lump formed in my throat. The air felt thick. My heart pounded in my chest, but I tried to steady myself. It was just Lily, right? Just an old friend trying to help me. It wasn't that simple, though. The park, the river, the place that would trigger everything I had spent so many years pushing away. But Lily didn't know. She couldn't know. I don't think I can today, I said, my voice barely a whisper, cracking with fear. She paused, and I could almost hear her frown on the other end of the line. Come on, Em, she urged, her voice softening. You can't stay locked up in that apartment forever. You've been shutting yourself in for weeks. Let's go to that park down by the river, remember? We used to love it there. The park. The word hit me like a physical blow. I froze. No, I couldn't go back there. I couldn't. The park, the one by the river, was where it all happened. The fight, the loss, the guilt that never left me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it. That day, that argument with my sister, the harsh words, the cold silence that followed, and the world that seemed to crumble under the weight of what happened next. I fought against the flood of memories rising in my chest, but they wouldn't stop. They never did. But Lily wouldn't understand. She wouldn't get it. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw. Em. Lily's voice snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. Come on, it's just like old times. We'll have fun. We can sit by the river like we used to. There it was again, her insistence, the way she pulled you back into the world. I sighed, trying to push the dread away. Okay, I said, my voice almost a whisper. I'll meet you there. As soon as I hung up, I leaned against the wall, my heart racing. My legs felt like lead, my mind a storm of confusion and fear. Why had I agreed? Why had I let her convince me? I knew what was waiting. I could feel it, crawling under my skin, whispering in the back of my mind. The faceless man. The thing that had been following me, lurking just out of reach. But it was too late to back out now. When I arrived at the park, it was exactly how I remembered it. But somehow, everything felt wrong. The air was too heavy, the shadows too long, as if the world itself had shifted, had become something darker, something more suffocating. The river murmured softly in the background, its waters moving lazily beneath the trees, but the sound felt hollow, distant. The trees towered over the path, their bare branches stretching like skeletal hands, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Lily was already ahead of me, her steps light, carefree. She was laughing, chatting about something, but I could barely hear her over the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I wanted to turn around, I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Not without her thinking I was crazy. I couldn't explain why my body was rigid with fear, why the very ground beneath my feet felt like it was swallowing me whole. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, trying to block out the suffocating thoughts racing through my mind. The memory of that argument, of the final words that had passed between us, before everything shattered. And then, just as I was starting to think maybe it would be okay, just as I was beginning to calm myself down, he appeared. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, standing at the edge of the path, just beyond the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just the way the shadows were falling. But then, I saw him more clearly. His shape was indistinct, but I knew it was him. I could feel it, the weight of his presence pressing down on me, the faceless man. I couldn't look directly at him. Every time I tried, my vision would blur, my chest would tighten, and my breath would catch in my throat. But I knew he was there, watching, waiting. Lily's voice drifted back to me, but it sounded like it was coming from a far distance, muffled by the growing panic in my chest. Em, are you okay? What's wrong?" I couldn't answer her. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I could barely move. All I could do was watch as the faceless man stood motionless in the distance, his outline barely there, swallowed by the shadows of the trees. He wasn't moving, but his presence seemed to stretch out around me, suffocating the air. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen in place. "Em!" Lily called again, turning toward me, her voice cutting through the panic. She was still too far away. She didn't see him. She couldn't see him. I had to get away. I had to leave this place, this park, where everything had gone wrong. But my feet wouldn't move. They were glued to the earth, bound by something darker, something colder than I had ever known. The faceless man wasn't just a memory. He wasn't just something my mind had created. He was here. He had always been here, watching me, waiting for me to return, waiting for me to remember. "Em!" Lily was closer now, but her voice sounded distant, like she was calling from a world I could no longer reach. She reached for me, but before she could touch my arm, the world tilted. I felt the weight of the past pressing in on me, pushing me to the ground. And then, in that moment, everything shattered. I looked back at the faceless man, my heart pounding in my ears, and I knew. He wasn't just following me, he was me. The guilt, the pain, the loss. Everything I had buried deep inside, it had all come to the surface, and the faceless man was the manifestation of everything I couldn't escape. I couldn't outrun it, not anymore, and I didn't know how to face it. The moment I stepped into the park, I knew I had made a mistake. The air felt different here, thicker, heavier, as though something was weighing it down. The trees that once felt welcoming, their branches stretching overhead like the arms of an old friend, now seemed like looming sentinels, their twisted limbs reaching toward me with a kind of silent aggression. The shadows they cast were darker than they should have been, and the soft breeze that once rustled through the leaves now felt cold and uninviting. The path beneath my feet seemed to stretch on longer than I remembered, as if the ground itself was pulling me deeper into this place. I could smell the damp earth, the musk of decay that clung to the air, mingling with the faint scent of wet leaves. Once, this park had been a sanctuary, a place of peace where I could clear my mind. But now, it felt like a trap. The world outside seemed far away, like it had ceased to exist altogether. Lily was ahead, too far for me to catch up without losing myself in the overwhelming flood of emotions surging through me. Her laughter, so light and carefree, echoed in the distance, a sound that felt foreign here, like it didn't belong. I wanted to call out to her, to beg her to stop, but the words wouldn't come. This was supposed to be the place where I could find myself again, but instead I was slowly losing everything. "Em, you used to love it here." Lily's voice broke through the fog in my mind, but it only made the unease grow. I wanted to smile, to pretend like nothing had changed, like I could just step back into the past, where everything was simple. But I couldn't. I couldn't pretend anymore. I kept moving, my feet heavy on the path. With every step, I could feel the park closing in around me, the trees bending inward, the air thickening. There was something wrong here, something that hadn't been here before. The world felt off kilter, like the ground was shifting beneath my feet, and my mind wasn't sure how to keep up. The memories flooded me without warning. The argument, the words, the loss, the guilt. It all came crashing back in waves, threatening to pull me under. I could almost hear my sister's voice, that last conversation before everything broke. The look in her eyes, the hurt and the anger. I had never been able to escape that moment. Not since that day. And now, here I was, walking through the very place that had witnessed the unraveling of everything I had once held dear. And then, just as I tried to push those memories away, I saw him. The figure. At the edge of the path, standing in the darkened shadows of the trees, his form barely discernible against the thickening darkness. He didn't move, not at first, but I knew it was him, the faceless man. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. I could feel the cold creeping in, slipping under my skin, seeping into my bones. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, the world around me seemed to fade into a blur. There was only him, standing there, waiting, watching. His figure was not quite human, not quite solid. He was an absence, a void that twisted and bent reality around him. I couldn't see his face, not clearly, but I knew. I knew without a doubt that he was the reason I had never been able to truly leave my past behind. My legs refused to move. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. His presence was suffocating, drowning me in a sense of guilt I couldn't escape. The shadows seemed to stretch out from him, reaching toward me, and I could feel them tightening around my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I was trapped. Em? Lily's voice sounded distant, too distant. She didn't see him. She couldn't see what I saw. But I could hear her. She was too far ahead, oblivious to the growing terror that was gripping me. Her footsteps echoed off the path, and I tried to call to her, to make her stop, but my voice caught in my throat, the words lost in the silence. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't face him. Every time I tried to force myself to look, to see the details, my vision would blur, the darkness bleeding in at the edges. The faceless man was more than just a shadow. He was the embodiment of everything I had buried, the guilt, the pain, the anger, the loss. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt like the air itself was suffocating me, the space around me closing in as the faceless man remained still, unmoving, but there, always there, watching, waiting. I forced myself to look away, to look at the path beneath my feet, to move, but my body refused to cooperate. My legs felt like lead, my feet unwilling to move, stuck in the thick, cold air that clung to me like a second skin. I glanced back at Lily, but she was too far away, her voice too far to reach me. I couldn't even hear the sound of her footsteps anymore. The park felt empty now, silent except for the sound of my own breath. And then, just as I thought I might be able to break free, to outrun the suffocating weight of my past, I felt it. The cold, icy touch of something creeping up my spine, curling into the back of my mind, urging me to turn around. I did. And he was closer. The faceless man was no longer at the edge of the trees. He was standing at the end of the path, not far from me now, his figure a dark, shifting mass against the pale gray sky. His form wavered, shifting like smoke, yet he felt more solid than ever. The emptiness of his face was more pronounced now, the void where his features should have been a terrible black hole that swallowed everything around him. I couldn't stop it. The memory, the fear, the guilt, it all came flooding back in an instant. The fight, the loss, the mistake, the words I had said, the things I had done, all of it, everything I had buried for so long, rose to the surface. And there he was, him, the faceless man. He wasn't just a memory. He wasn't a ghost. He was me. The guilt, the regret, the unspoken truths. I had never left them behind. They were always with me, following me, waiting for the moment when I couldn't run anymore. I tried to speak, to scream, to tell Lily to run, to get away from the park, but the words didn't come. My mouth was dry, my body paralyzed by the sheer weight of everything I had tried to escape. And as I stood there, trapped between my past and the present, I realized the truth. I could never escape him. I could never escape myself. The air was thick. It clung to my skin, suffocating me. pressing me deeper into the earth beneath my feet. The park felt different now. It didn't look like the place I remembered. The trees were taller, more oppressive. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, curling around me, as if the park itself was alive, watching, waiting. I could hear the rustle of leaves above me, but it wasn't the peaceful sound I had known. It was unnerving, the movement of the wind more like a whisper, like something trying to tell me a secret I didn't want to hear. My steps faltered, as if the ground itself was pulling me deeper into the path. I could feel it now, the weight, the tension, the knowledge that something was wrong. Something had shifted in the air, and it was all centered on him, the faceless man. There was no way to escape him now. He was no longer lurking at the edges of my vision, no longer just a shadow, a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye. He was standing before me, a dark, towering figure, his form defined against the backdrop of the dying light. He didn't have a face, just a hollow void, a yawning emptiness that seemed to consume everything around him. His presence was so strong that it bent the world to his will. The trees bent toward him, as though even they feared him. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, a cold sweat prickling at my skin. My feet refused to move, like they were cemented to the earth. I wanted to scream, to run, but the moment I locked eyes with the darkness where his face should have been, I couldn't tear myself away. The guilt, the weight of all those years I had tried to bury, pulled me in, binding me to him. I was caught, trapped, and I knew, deep down, that I would never escape until I faced him. I could feel the guilt rise up, swelling in my chest, thick and suffocating, just like the air around me. It was the same feeling I had when I was younger, when I had made that terrible mistake. That fight, those last words I could never take back. I had buried it all for so long, convinced myself that if I just didn't look at it, I could move on. But the faceless man was the truth I had refused to face, the weight of my own mistakes come to life. He took a step forward, his presence growing stronger, his shadow stretching, swallowing the path ahead. "You can't run from me forever," he said. His voice wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a low growl or a whisper. It was my own voice. The voice I had longed to silence. The voice that screamed inside my head every time I tried to move forward. You can't outrun your past. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream at him to go away, to leave me alone. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. "You've been hiding from me for years," the faceless man continued. His words were calm, almost gentle, but they hit me like a battering ram. "Hiding from the truth. Hiding from the guilt you refuse to face. But I'm not going anywhere, Emily. You can't escape me." The weight of his words crushed me. Every ounce of guilt, every moment I had tried to bury, rose to the surface, flooding me, drowning me. I could see my sister's face, her eyes wide with hurt, with confusion. I could hear her voice, feel the anger and the pain I had caused. I could still hear her words, words that I could never take back, and the silence that followed. The silence that stretched between us like an abyss. And I had never crossed it. I had never apologized. I had never said the words that could have healed it. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I tried to steady myself. "Please," I whispered, "please leave me alone." But the faceless man didn't leave. He stepped closer, and with every step I could feel my heart sink deeper into my chest, like a weight pulling me down, dragging me into the darkness. "You think you can run from me?" he asked, his voice growing colder. "You can't escape me. I am you. I am everything you refuse to face, everything you refuse to accept." I closed my eyes, the tears coming now, hot and bitter. but the faceless man's presence was all-encompassing. It felt like I was suffocating, my lungs failing, my heart racing in my chest as I fought against the memories that flooded me. I'm not the same person anymore, I thought. I've changed. I've moved on. But I knew that wasn't true. Not really. I hadn't moved on. I had been running from myself, from the truth I was too afraid to confront. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how much time passed, the faceless man would always be there, waiting for me to look him in the eyes. "You have to face me," he said, his voice softer now. "You have to face yourself." And in that moment I knew he was right. He wasn't some demon or creature of the night. He wasn't a shadow I could outrun. He was me. He was the guilt, the shame, the fear, the things I had buried so deep inside that I couldn't even remember when they had started. He was the part of me that I had pushed away, convinced myself I could forget. But he was always there, waiting for me to remember, waiting for me to forgive myself. And in that moment I understood. The faceless man was a mirror. He was my reflection, the part of me that I had rejected, the part of me that had never healed. I had to face it. I had to face him. I took a deep breath, choking on the air, and slowly, painfully, I forced myself to open my eyes. The faceless man stood before me, the void where his face should have been staring back at me, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I let the guilt flood me. I let it suffocate me. I let the truth of what I had done, of what I had failed to do, take root in me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it all. The faceless man stood there, silent, as the world around us seemed to fade. The park, the trees, the river, they all melted away, leaving only him and me. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, but necessary. The weight of everything I had been running from crashed over me, and I stood there, letting it wash over me, accepting it, understanding that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could forgive myself. And with that realization, the faceless man began to fade. The shadows that had once held him in place melted into the air, dissipating like smoke on a breeze. The park slowly returned to its familiar state, quiet, empty, the wind rustling through the trees. And I stood there, finally free from the grip of the past, knowing that while the faceless man might never fully leave me, I had learned how to live with him. I had faced the truth, and for the first time in years I could breathe. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.